I will call this meeting of the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee to order. Today is Monday, October 17th, and we're in the council chambers of City Hall. First item on the agenda is to identify any potential conflicts of interest. You have the agenda before you. Is there anybody who wishes to declare any conflicts of interest based on the agenda in front of you? Seeing now, we'll move on to number 3, citizens' comments. Are there any citizens who wish to comment to the council or to the committee? Any citizens' comments? Any citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll move on. Number 4 is the consent agenda, which includes the minutes of the October 3rd, 2022 meeting, the minutes of the October 4th, 2022 meeting, the minutes of the October 11th, 2022 meeting, bills and payroll, and report of personnel actions. What's your pleasure? I have a motion by Mr. Wagner to approve. Second by Mrs. Tompkins. Any discussion, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Number 5, consideration of items removed. There were none. Number 6, request to recommend council approval of the 2023 ambulance contract with neighboring municipalities, presented by Jordan Munger, Accounting Manager. Jordan.
Good evening. As is customary, every year we have lapsing contracts with all of the townships that are around us that we provide ambulance services to. We are doing a rate update to that and proposing one. This has already gone through PFC and has received their approval. Before you, we are asking for a 7% proposed rate increase. The townships are listed below at their 2022 actuals and their 2023 projected. This is all coming in from the standpoint that our projected 2023 budget is to increase its expenses by 7.4%. CPI for all items, Midwest region, is 8.1%, and we landed on the 7. So our recommendation is that staff recommends the the Finance Budget Commission to approve the rate increase.
What's your desire? Mr. Hendler. We have a motion to approve by Mr. Hendler. Second by Mrs. Tompkins. Any questions, discussion? Yes, Mr. Wagner.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Unger, can you tell us what percentage of the total EMS budget is represented by this $446,442? Do you have that number?
Well, it's roughly, I'd say, close to 20% because the EMS budget is around $2 million worth of expenses. So I believe it's around that number if I have my amounts correct.
So would anybody here know what percentage of the calls that we answer in a year are to those communities?
I don't have that number offhand.
May I recognize the chief?
Yep, chief can speak.
I believe that number is roughly 10%.
That their calls, the calls to service these townships are 10% of the total budget.
I believe they're roughly 10%.
Or of the total experience.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a reason on the 7% when the consumer price index is 8.1?
From our standpoint and from the PFC standpoint also, we were trying to be lenient as best we could on the townships.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, we have a motion to recommend council approval of the ambulance contracts. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. All right, number 7, request to recommend council approval to refill a vacant firefighter/paramedic position, presented by Pete Fletty, Fire Chief. Chief Fletty.
Thank you again. We recently had a retirement of Lieutenant Kelly Osker. He submitted his retirement effective December 24th, 2022. He's currently using his vacation paid holidays and comp time until his retirement date, and due to a medical issue, will not be able to return to work. So what I'm asking you tonight is to, I'm requesting to fill his opening as soon as possible. We do have a very qualified candidate waiting in the wings to hire. We'd like to get him on board as soon as possible. There are a number of departments around Marshfield that are hiring. So again, we'd like to get him on board. So I am requesting to please fill his position in the fire prevention budget. And this was passed before PFC on, what was it, last Tuesday? I don't remember the date. Sorry. Okay. I believe it was the 13th.
Okay. It's your pleasure. Mrs. Tompkins. Microphone? Microphone, please.
I motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve?
Yep.
Second by Mr. Hendler. Any questions or comments? Mr. Wagner?
Yes, sir. Chief, is this a fourth vacancy? You had 3 vacancies already. Is this a fourth? Or
Yes.
is this one of the 3?
This is a 4th vacancy. This is a recent retirement, yes.
So you haven't moved to replace any of the 3 other vacancies?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Number 8, request and recommend council approval to refill the vacant city planner position presented by Steve Barr, city administrator. Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Well, Stephen Wiley, our city planner, resigned. His last day here will be this Friday, October 24st. He'll be starting a job with another municipality up in northern Wisconsin, also in planning and community development. The city planner obviously serves a very key function for the city, involvement including short and long range plans, municipal code, zoning code, annexation requests, updating the official city map, making presentations to the plan commission and the council, among many other things. Refilling this vacancy is certainly critical. It's an important part of our community and economic development, operations. And as far as residential, commercial, and industrial growth, this person plays a key role in bringing about orderly projects and development. So at this time, staff would be recommending that the committee recommend council approval to refill the vacancy in the position of city planner.
It's your pleasure. I have a motion to approve by Mrs. Tompkins, a second by Mr. Wagner. Any questions or discussion?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Wagner.
Steve, we're having a lot of difficulty in filling slots in that position. This position is in one, but in the Director of Development Services, we've interviewed. Do we know when we're going to have a director on board?
We did interview someone. That person is considering the position right now. We haven't heard for sure whether they're going to accept. And that'll play into the next item on the associate planner a little bit too, as far as how this all goes through the loops, because the associate planner thing is something that we delayed, hoping to have a development services director on board first.
But I think I suggest, and I don't know if you followed up on it or not, but the county finally, after years of resisting it, became members of the North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. And as that, we're entitled to staff support for various projects there. Also, it was not uncommon for those regional planning commissions to negotiate with cities for a shared staff position. Have you considered that? Have you looked into that?
I didn't reject that idea. I just haven't pursued it yet. But I know I've had some past history with North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning, and I know that they do good work. And like you said, that Wood County is part of the city itself has never joined, but I guess we were considered to be members through Wood County.
We are. That's the good thing about it. There are a lot of freebies that we can get from them, and or very high, very reduced cost types of planning efforts. So
there's 2 issues we're
facing. This
facing.
does play for both positions, obviously.
There's 2 issues we're facing, obviously, right now. One is a longer term and one is a short term. And I'm going to get into the short term as we get into the council meeting. I really wanted to have that discussion as far as some interim services here, but I wasn't ready when the agenda was going out yet on Friday morning.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mrs. Spiros?
Yes, I want to wish Mr. Wiley the best of everything in his new position. I don't feel like I can let this pass without saying it. I think that we need to start looking at our employees a little bit harder and promotions a little bit harder. I think that we let talent just walk out our door.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll take action on the motion in front of us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. Number 9, request to recommend council approval to refill the vacant associate planner position presented by Steve Barr, city administrator. Mr. Barr.
Thank you. Emmett Simkowski resigned as our associate planner back in the middle of May of this year. He took a job with a county, also in the field of planning, and we wish him well as well, although he's been gone now for a few months, so it's been a while. But anyway, our first effort to find a replacement for Mr. Simkowski was not successful. We really didn't get any candidates that we saw as being even worth interviewing that had the skills and abilities to do the job. And I want to stop at this point and say that everybody I've talked to and continue to talk to tells me just how difficult the job market is in general. And as I'll be mentioning a little bit later tonight, as we look for interim services, the consulting firm that we're talking with for that is saying that there's openings rampantly all over the state right now in the planning field that can't be filled. In fact, the position that Mr. Wiley is taking has been vacant since March. So this is not uncommon. But anyway, our thought when Mr. Simkowski left was that we would try to find somebody. We didn't. And then we thought, let's put it on hold, hoping to have a development services director here, see if that person had any thoughts about moving forward with any department structure issues, the job description, anything like that, and be a part of hiring that associate planner. Well, looking at it now, again, I told you that there's an individual considering that job right now, but we're kind of feeling the need that we need to get moving because we don't have any bodies at City Hall that deal with planning. I have a planning background going back a long time, but I haven't done it for a while, and I've got plenty of other job duties, so I don't want to be too actively involved in planning and zoning matters. So we feel it's worthwhile at this point for us to post, as well as the city planner position for the associate planner position. So my recommendation is that the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee recommend council authorization to begin the process of refilling the vacancy in the associate planner position.
Mr. Hendler.
I'll make a motion to continue the process in following the vacant associate planner position to the council.
Okay. Second by Mrs. Spiros. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you, and I do look forward to the other conversation in the regular council meeting.
Okay, number 10, request to recommend council approval of revised city policy number 3.390, zero tolerance for workplace violence and weapons, presented by Sarah Dressel, Human Resources Director. Ms. Dressel.
Thank you. So the original policy titled zero tolerance for violence and zero tolerance for violence and weapons in the workplace was created and eventually approved on June 22nd of 1999. A revised policy was completed and approved in September of 2011. This year on July 12th, council did approve the removal of signs from City Hall that prohibited firearms and other weapons. This prompted us to examine the violence and weapons in the workplace policy itself. So an initial recommendation for update was presented on August 2nd. From that meeting, additional issues were raised to the updates that were presented. So further changes have been made based on some of those issues that were raised. So I've worked with members of the council, consulted with other municipalities, and reached out to our city attorney just to get more information and gather additional items for the policy itself. So additions and changes included in the updated policy include some definitions that were added, terminology changes, and specifics to conceal and carry. So in the packet, you'll find a clean, updated version of the policy along with a redline version for comparison. The only additional change to mention would be that the date that is on the policy for a revision date would obviously change from September 20th of 2022, since it was removed at that time, to when it would be approved. So at this time, staff recommends that the committee recommend council approval to the revised policy number 3390.
It's your pleasure. I have a motion by Mr. Hendler to approve.
Second, sir.
A second by Mr. Wagner. Questions, discussion? Mrs. Tompkins.
All right, so I'm going to turn this way. Firstly, I thank you for going back to this policy because it's a much better policy, much clearer. I have a few questions that are kind of implied in here, so I just want to clarify to make sure that they would cover this situation. So it says an individual who chooses to carry a concealed weapon shall have the weapon concealed and on the individual's person at all times unless lawfully using the weapon. So I would assume that if there was an accidental discharge, that the weapon was no longer concealed or on the individual's person at that time. So I'm assuming that if there's an accidental discharge, they have no longer followed the policy. Is that correct?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to answer that.
Okay, and I think this just needs to be clear in the policy. Also, if they're no longer following the policy because they've taken that weapon off of themselves or it's no longer concealed, would that automatically trigger them having, if they do not adhere to this policy, will result in a corrective action up to and including termination?
So a definition that we worked on with the city attorney does mention that, and this kind of goes to the first part of yours, the weapon itself as described or as defined, it does not have to be completely hidden, just as defined by law and things like that. So what was the second part of your question?
So the question is, if there is an accidental discharge and if that is because it was not completely hidden or it was off the individual's person in order for them to pull the trigger, would that result in disciplinary action?
In a violation? I would definitely say, based on, what we have in here, I would say yes.
Does that need to be clear in the policy? I'm just not sure.
In my opinion, I feel like as we were going through various iterations of the policy, it's very difficult to put every scenario into here. So we were trying to be general, but yet specific at the same time. I think much of the discussion that I had, with Steve and a variety of other individuals, I think it really truly is case by case, and each incident has to be treated case by case. So I would say there are going to be times where it does depend on the situation.
Okay, because we're just dealing with a deadly weapon, so it would be good to have a clear. Okay, then the next question I have is, if there's an accidental discharge, which, as I'm reading the policy, means that they're not following the policy, caused by an elected official, do they get disciplined? Because part of this issue came up because elected officials wanted to carry it in this chamber.
I'm going to defer to Steve, just because obviously he has more experience with this piece of it. Sorry, Steve.
I'm going to come up and pretend that I have more experience with this. No, I'm just kidding, Sarah. Yeah, that's a really good question. And when Sarah's been writing back and forth with HAP, and I've been part of that, answering every single individual question like this is interesting. Every time you answer something, there's another one that comes up. I'm not sure I really know the answer to that question, Natasha, but it's one we probably need to nail down yet.
And then I have one more question. Sorry, Rebecca, and I'll be done. If there is an injury caused by an accidental discharge, are we, the city, liable if they decide to sue us?
I think HAP would say no. I mean, one of the things we talked about when we first talked about allowing weapons, period, I mean, taking on the signs, was would there be, what would be the liability to the city if in fact we did that, if in fact we lifted the restriction on carrying. And I think he would say, I mean, there's always a risk of anything. People could sue for whatever reason, but that we'd probably be, not liable for that.
Okay, so I would just say that this policy has improved so much. I would like to see just a mention of accidental discharge and having clarity on where that falls in this policy.
Let me take one step farther. What I think we would be in trouble for is not enforcing the policy. If in fact we became aware of employees doing things that they shouldn't and not following the policy, or and we just kind of closed our eyes and something happened from that, I think that would be a different issue. But it would be incumbent upon us, when we became informed, became aware of someone not following the policy, to act.
Mrs. Spiros?
I was just going to say, I thought the policy did a pretty good job. I don't know if you could policy every single possible circumstance that could occur. I think you have to do some generalizations. I don't know that you could think through every single thing that could ever occur. You could have an accidental discharge if somebody trips walking in the door and just lands the right way. I mean, there could be a lot of things. So I think that those would have to be handled individually depending on what the thing is. In reference to whether an elected employee can get in trouble for that, elected employees are elected. I don't believe that they are subjected to your HR rules and regulations. I think that they fall under a different venue, if I'm not mistaken. Elected employees are elected, and their form of discipline, I think, has to be something that's called upon for the council has to do that, and then it has to be initiated, whether it be a hearing. I don't believe that we're under the same rules as the HR for employees, as we are not employees of the city of Marshfield. So I actually thought the policy was pretty good. I realize that there's no possibility of figuring out every single possible scenario. So I thought that you actually did a good job. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I guess I just have a real quick question, and it's probably good that the police chief walked in. He did. This refers a lot to concealed carry. Is there anything with open carry? Because I don't know what, forgive me, I don't know the laws on open carry versus concealed carry, and if that's acceptable, permissible. I don't know what the laws are regarding open carry in a building such as this. Chief.
If I'm not mistaken, open carry, unless actual court was in session in the building, I think actually would be allowed.
So then this policy prohibits open carry because everything has to be concealed carry?
Yeah, unless there's a specific rule saying that you can't open carry, I think it would be allowed. But I would have to review or reach out to HAP for that.
My understanding was, yes, that it would allow for open carry.
It says it has to be.
Oh, yes.
So if this is where it gets a little tricky, and this is where we had, discussions with HAP. It's kind of, unless you have signage, that's the piece that you can open carry.
So open carry is automatically allowed, but the policy says that concealed carry has to be concealed. Remain concealed.
Steve, do you remember when we were talking about this with HAP? How the discussion went with the open carry piece?
No.
I can give further clarification on that piece.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? We had a motion on this? Okay, we had a motion by Hendler and second by Wagner to approve the policy. With no further discussion, Mr. Wagner?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, seeing as some questions have been raised which are going to require further clarification, I'd like to make a motion to postpone this or to re-refer it to the committee for the next meeting, but when we will have a clarification on open carry versus concealed carry.
Okay, so we have a motion to postpone the vote on this until this can be referred back to this committee with those clarifications completed. Do I have a second for that motion? I'll second it. All right, so we'll vote on the motion to postpone the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. All right, number 11. Request to recommend council approval of resolution number 2022-41 State Trust Fund loan in the amount of $139,000 for the 2022 capital expenditures presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director.
Good evening. The majority of the 22 borrowing for capital projects was financed through bonds. There were some ineligible items that could not be financed with bonds, and as had been our customary practice is to use the state trust fund loan as the option to finance those items. So for this request, there were $139,000 of approved capital projects. One would be $5,000 for a taxi vehicle, which is the city's portion, and then $134,000 for police squad cars. The state trust fund loans are granted through the Board of Commissioners of Public Land, and they offer anywhere from 2 to 20-year fixed rate loans, and there's always an early payoff option. This loan is being requested for 3 years, and the interest rate is locked in at the time I checked on October 13th at 5.5%, and there are no issuance costs. With that, staff recommends the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee approval and recommendation of resolution number 2022-41 to Common Council.
It's your pleasure. Mr. Hendler moves to approve.
For second for purposes of the discussion only.
Mr. Wagner is seconding for purposes of discussion. And Mr. Wagner, I'm assuming you have some discussion to make.
Yeah, don't we have an internal service fund to allow for this for the police department also?
In our past history, the Internal Service Fund has not purchased the police vehicles. That is something I'm trying to...
It's only for public works, sir.
It's been used for public works. Police and fire vehicles have not, in recent history, been a part of the Internal Service Fund.
Have we ever done this? I don't recall ever going through the state trust fund to get vehicles for the police department.
Yep, the last, I believe, at least 3 years, we still have outstanding loans. I think that was something the former finance director kind of managed, and each year in the past 3 years where we have an outstanding balance on these loans includes
something for the past 3 years.
Yeah, yep, it's our practice.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll vote on that motion to recommend council approval for this borrowing. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The motion carries. Number 12, discuss ordinance to create an audit committee presented by Ed Wagner, Council President. Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is sort of getting toward the end of a long road for this ordinance. We've tried to do this before and people couldn't see the need for it. I think in the past 4 years, we've all become aware that we as a council need somebody on our side. We also need somebody who can interpret the intricacies of accounting and explain them to us in a manner that we can all understand. what you've got in front of you, I think you've got the redlined version or the final version of the one that Hap just looked over. And I think he's looked over this thing so many times, he's getting blind, but he made some changes to it. He decided it would fit in a better place of the city code than the one we originally had it in, which is inconsequential to the material part of the ordinance. And he made a very good point. We talked about the members of the audit committee being elected. And he felt that that put a connotation in it that wasn't necessary and perhaps even dangerous. So he wanted that changed to appointed, and he did. He changed in the process of putting this together. He did. And then he also took out some of the verbiage on the processes that the audit committee would have to follow, and basically replace that with doing its business consistent with the procedure applicable to the Common Council in Section 3.36 of the City Code, unless a different procedure is specified in this section. He also changed the meetings of it. It said that, well, he basically called to our attention that it was a process that probably no other committees actually use. But then again, they have, most of the other standing committees have guaranteed meeting date, guaranteed times and meeting date. This one wouldn't. That's about it. There was one last thing. Oh, there was and there is a provision for the committee submitting to the council an annual budget of what they figure they're going to need for the year. He said that we have no other provisions like this in the code. Is it necessary to have this committee have a budget independent of any other departmental budget? If you're requiring this, some consideration as to how this budget gets established in the future has to be done. Quite frankly, I'm all for taking that section out. It's just a lot cleaner. A lot of other things would do it. So that's all that's in the ordinance. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it or not. But I'm not asking for you to make a decision on it tonight, but we'll bring it back to another Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee. In the meantime, the Nonprofit Risk Management Center, which sounds like a real fun organization, it'd be, they put out a site, especially for nonprofits like cities and counties and that sort of thing, as to, and try and explaining what the difference is between an audit committee and a finance committee. And they basically drew up a nice chart, nice, easy, simple to read chart on the differences between the committees and what they're there for. And I will make copies of this available to you if you would wish to have it. And it's a handy little document. I'll be happy to answer any questions you've got. And like I said, I'm not going to ask for, because I know you haven't had a chance to go through it. So I'm not going to ask you to approve that tonight, but put it off till the next meeting. So
okay, so this will be on our November 1st agenda then for action. In the meantime, are there any questions at this time? Yes, Mrs. Tompkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wagner, what was the section you said you would take out to make it cleaner?
It's a section, it's one that says that it would prepare a budget. It's just right near to the last of it on the last page.
Oh, section G or number G.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, and on the question you had pondered earlier about whether or not we should put a residency clause in here. Hap's answer to me on that was that the residency requirement for people serving on city committees is a blanket policy. So if there was somebody here who wanted to be on the committee and the committee felt that it was, and the council felt that it was in the city's best interest to have them there, even if they weren't a resident, then we would have to follow the same policy which Hap outlined before, which is a 2/3 vote of the council to make the exception. So there's no guarantee in here, or there's no residency in here, but it's all purpose.
Any other questions or discussion? Okay, we'll look for that item on our November 1st agenda. Number 13, review the city's 2022 debt summary presented by Jennifer Selensky, Finance Director. Ms. Selensky.
Hello. According to the city's debt management policy 4.9, the finance director is to prepare a report to the council about the status of the city's debt. At this point in time, the total government obligation debt is about $46.5 million. And including our lease to the CDA, that's about $48.2 million. At this point in time, we are under the statutory debt limit amount, which is $68.8 million. The debt that is being directly charged to the city's tax increment financing districts represents about 23% or $10.9 million of the total debt. Some items to note that TID 12 has incurred debt in the 22 bonds, but does not have any increment at this point in time to meet its debt service. That will come through if there is no revenue potential in 2023, that debt service payment will be considered a due from the general fund, which would cover that interest payment. The wastewater debt was paid off in March of 2022 and no longer has any long-term debt. The amount of the EMS debt of $1,045,000 is general obligation debt and is being included. Its principal and interest payments are being included in the 2023 levy in this budget cycle for you to review. In these numbers, the anticipated state trust fund loan of $139,000 is not completed. It's not reflected in those totals. And debt service is funded by the tax levy versus other sources that might finance the government's obligations. Any questions?
Questions from anybody on the committee? Okay, seeing none, then item 14 are suggested items for future agendas. Any suggested items for future agendas besides the reviewing of the audit committee for next meeting? Mrs. Spiros.
Thank you, Chair. I would like for the committee to look at the residency policy for members of committees. Specifically, I would like to see if there's an interest in adding people who that maybe not live within the city limits, but own businesses and pay taxes within the city limits. I'd like to see them be able to be on committees without needing 8 people on this council to say, oh, yes, by the way, they are worthy enough to run for a committee.
Okay. So we have the request to review the residency policy to include business owners. All right, any other future agenda items? Seeing none, seeing all business in front of this committee is completed, I do declare this meeting adjourned.